Welcome to Modus Cafe. Join us for fun, lighthearted, and educational conversations around training, athletic longevity, and the human side of climbing. With your hosts, Mercedes Pollmeyer and Katja Dev. Well, welcome to another episode with Modus Cafe. You're here with Mercedes and Katja. Katja, how you doing?
I'm good. I'm glad to be back. Today, we're going to talk about feeling burned out with training, which I will say, I'm coming out of winter training right now, and I see this in a lot of our athletes. I see it in myself regularly. This happens to me every winter. I train a lot at the gym, and at some point, I just feel like, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm walking through mud. I don't want to go to the gym anymore. I'm starting to not enjoy climbing anymore. It's just like everything feels heavy. And so I thought this is very normal if this happens to you. And so I thought I would talk about it, of course, with Mercedes and just help perhaps reset and like share some strategies of what to do. But sometimes even just hearing other people feel the same can be so, so helpful. And should we?
Awesome. Yeah, and I think before we go into this podcast, I just want to make a quick mention that I am running a pull-up program, a pull-up coaching program called Pulling Strong. I love this program so much because it has really helped, especially women, get their first pull-up. And we're going to be starting that course on May 6th. We're going to have a lot of resources for you kind of leading up to May 6th. But we already have a free pull-up masterclass, which I'm going to leave the link in the description below. So if you'd love to join us and get your first pull-up or your 10th pull-up, I highly recommend that you join us in Pulling Strong. All right, so let's get back to the episode. So we're going to talk about burning out on training.
Yeah. Have you ever burned out, Mercedes, on training?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I find that I find that I burn out a lot if I don't incorporate strategic breaks in my training. And a break doesn't mean that I'm stopping training, because we even just had a podcast about how we should really treat training as a practice, and that we show up every day with some sort of intention, and we're consistently working on the things that we want to work on. But if I'm pushing myself too much and I don't take a step back from that, at least, even every couple weeks, then I get burned out. And especially if the training is too hard and I'm not seeing progress too, that can also mentally feel very, very hard. So yeah, I've definitely been there through much of my climbing career.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think it's really important because I think, people see you as someone who's really strong and, trains consistently, which is true. And it's also true that people like you and I do burn out on it too. And, we've probably learned a lesson or two around that and how we can still stay consistent and kind of like get out of that hole or manage that hole. And that's really why I wanted to talk about that, because what I don't want for people is to just quit training altogether when they feel this way, when they feel like, oh, it doesn't feel good to me. It feels like I'm not making any progress. It's overwhelming. Why am I even here? I'm not enjoying this. Like, all of this is true. And we don't want you to do that. We don't want you to be in a place where you're so unhappy with your training. We don't want that. But we also don't want you, well, unless you really don't want to train anymore, of course, that's okay. But we want to essentially help people who do want to continue training to like work through those difficult times of training. And I will say that happens to me in the winter, but I think this can also happen to people when life just gets busy. Let's say you start training and you have this amazing training plan, but then other things in your life happen. Like your kids get really sick or other family members get sick or you start traveling. Sometimes there's just phases in our lives that tend to be really busy, and then training can feel particularly overwhelming. I've seen this in my athletes too. And so what we do, we always adjust training plans when life gets busy, because we don't want training to be this horrible thing that needs to be squeezed in. And the truth is, we can often edit a training plan in a way that will fit your lifestyle, which is, again, if you want to go back to, I think it was last week's or the week before podcast episode, we talked about training as a lifestyle. And so today's episode will kind of like feed into this and this idea of what can we do when training does, burn you out, because we don't want that. And that will not be helpful in terms of incorporating training as a lifestyle. So what are some things you do, Mercedes, to either come out of that or try to prevent that or work around that?
I think it depends on how deep I am in my program or maybe like where I'm at. I would say when I'm like this is not going to be profound at all. But when I'm in the middle of a training program and I am feeling unmotivated, things feel kind of hard. Maybe I feel a little tired, but I'm not to the point where it's affecting my performance. I just feel kind of tired. Um, I do have this sense of like not wanting to go to the gym. And at that point, it's just remembering that if I show up, like I'm still gonna get it done, no matter how it feels at the gym, what my performance is. So really it's like punching the clock. Like that's how I feel about like that's my mental approach to those situations is I'm just gonna go in and punch the clock. And often just like that mindset approach can help me get through that session. Because you don't always have to, I think that's also the misconception about training is that you have to always be performing and performing at the same level every time. But it's completely normal for your energy levels, for the grades that you're climbing to fluctuate in every day and in those drills. You know, especially if you have a power endurance drill, the grades of those climbs might change significantly based on how you're feeling. So that's probably my biggest mindset approach is punch in the clock when things feel hard. Just go in and get it done.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And can I ask you a follow-up question, which is, how do you often feel after you got your training done?
Um, well, mentally, I feel great because I'm like, oh, look at me. I'm so proud. I'm so proud of myself that I went in and got it done. Um, and I don't have like those feelings of guilt or that I'm letting myself down by not showing up. And so I kind of alleviate all of that. Physically, sometimes I feel better, sometimes I feel the same.
Mhm.
And if for some reason I start to feel worse on my session, I will stop. It's rare that I
Yeah.
don't feel good by the end of the session.
Yeah, okay, that is wonderful. And this was not scripted, but I was hoping you would say this simply because at this point, I also want to just briefly touch on the aspect of overtraining because we're not here to keep, we're not here to keep pushing you if you are overtraining. Because, like feeling burned out with training, it could mean that you're overtraining. And at that point, that's really, you have to reassess your training plan. Um, perhaps with a coach. I don't know who you're training with. That's really important. If you're overtraining and you're starting to really feel burned out, that will not be good in the long run. It will not be good mentally and physically. And I usually use a rule of thumb that Mercedes kind of just, explained, which is if I don't feel like training, but I still go and I feel better afterwards, mentally and physically, I know I'm not overtraining. I just know this is probably more of a mental slump, which we'll talk about in a minute. But if I feel really drained and my body doesn't want to train after my warm up and while I'm training, and if I feel worse afterwards, that's not a good sign. Sometimes that just means I have a bad week that could happen. But if that keeps happening, I go to the gym, I feel tired going to the gym, and I feel even worse afterwards. To me, that's a sign that I'm doing too much for my body. That might be training too much. That might just be that my overall stress load is too much. Maybe there's too much going on in my life, but that definitely means at that point, I need to make a change to my schedule, which is really important. So there's a chance that someone is overtraining, but if you're not overtraining, you can still feel like you're burning out on training because it is mentally fatiguing to go to the gym because the way we design training is we challenge our body. So it's not always easy and fun. We go to the gym and we often end up doing the same things week in, week out, like same things. It's like a grind. And I think, at least for me, it can be mentally very draining. So here's a few things that really helped me reset that I wanted to share today. And I would love to hear your thoughts on all of these too, Mercedes. The first thing I ask myself is, why do I climb? And why do I train for climbing? And this is really, really important. Like, why do we do what we do is such a simple question, yet so important. So I sit down with myself and I do this while I warm up. Why is this important to me? And I go through my own process, like reminding myself why I love to climb, reminding myself for why I love to train, reminding myself how it makes me feel and how much joy I'm having with climbing. And also reminding myself that these benefits I will be reaping in the future, starting in probably April and May when I can start climbing outside again. That's really important to me. So I even know from the beginning, why am I showing up in this gym? And then I always ask my question. So this might be an interesting one. How would I feel if I just quit? How would I feel if I just quit climbing? And how would I feel if I just quit training? I think that's a really important question to ask for yourself. And you don't have to do this with a person or a friend, but I feel like if you feel sad about it, if you feel like, oh yeah, no, I want to be here, then you're still doing the right thing, keep showing up. But sometimes when we ask ourselves, what would it feel like if we quit something, there might be a relief feeling coming up. There might be a sense of relief. And if you do feel a sense of relief, then I would encourage you to consider making changes to your climbing and training schedule for your mental health. That does not mean you have to quit climbing altogether, but just maybe making some changes. However, I will add a modifier. Don't ask yourself that question before a training session. You have to ask yourself that after a training session. This is important because, your mind just might not want to go to the gym that moment. So your mind might be like, oh, yeah, I want to quit training because I don't want to go today. But it's best to ask yourself during a time that's not directly related to a training session. And along the same lines, ask yourself, what are your priorities? What are your priorities in terms of your job, your family, your friends, and how does training affect it? I think that's also a really important question because sometimes training can feel overwhelming, not because of the training aspect itself, but sometimes because it can outcrowd other priorities. And that can make us feel drained. And of course, those other things are important. Let's say if I never got to see my friends because I'm always training, that might make me feel burned out. But asking myself the question, like, what are my priorities and which priorities are not getting done because I'm training can help me figure out why I actually don't want to train. So let's say I'm not seeing my friends. So it's actually not the training that I'm burning out on, but it's the fact that now I'm not seeing my friends because of how I created my schedule. Knowing that can help me just make those changes. So, for example, recently I actually just did this. I incorporated Monday walks with friends. I meet a friend for a coffee or a walk, and I'm very deliberate about it. And once I realized I just really want to see and talk to my friends more, I'm now incorporating those changes into my life. And all of a sudden, training started to be a lot lighter because it really wasn't the training. It was just that normally I hang out with friends when I climb, except when I train in the winter, I'm a little bit more structured. And there might be other priorities for you, like being outside or sleep or other things, but I'm encouraging you, if you do feel burned out with training, ask yourself these questions. Why do you train? Do you train for specific projects? Why do you climb? Do you really still love climbing? And what are your priorities outside of climbing and training? And do you still get those needs met? And if not, how can you adjust your training to get those other needs met? So training is not like the bad guy, who is making you not do all these other fun things. Okay, I have more to share, Mercedes. Do you want to say something to what I just said?
Well, I think this goes back to a coaching call we recently had for Modus Performance Training. And one of our students, she talked about like constantly feeling tired and possibly kind of hitting. She didn't really use these words, but I can see this leading to a point of burnout where that you're training so hard every session that you kind of are like, you have no choice but to have to take a break every couple weeks, and when you do push yourself physically all the time because you think you have to in order to gain a result, um, like physically you're gonna burn out and mentally you will as well. And so let's like just kind of touching on the physical aspect of burning out. and like possibly getting into this overtraining is that you really do have to find like a workload that you can repeat every day. You know, if you had to do this almost every day, what does that workload look like? You know, what does that intensity look like? Like, are your sessions going to be 3 hours or are they going to be more like 75 minutes? Is that more repeatable than 3 hours a day? Um, you know, do you get pumped every session? And is that actually tolerable every day? And the answer is often no. You know, like if you are like getting to a point of being pumped, getting to a point of exhaustion at the end of every session, and spending more than 90 minutes in a training session. You know, like think about those things. Like, what are you doing right now? And see if you can adjust your session so that you're physically not going to overtrain or get to that point of burnout.
Yeah, totally. Thank you for that. So my next suggestions are either actually in response to what you said, you're actually physically burning out because you're doing too much, or that could be in response of life just getting too busy, or that could be in response to you perhaps getting sick. You're just physically not feeling well. There could be many reasons for it. But the two things I want to talk about, one is, reduce your training. You don't need to quit it altogether, but just reduce the overall load. If you're not working with a coach already, you could consider maybe just getting a consultation. We just see this a lot. We have this, athlete in our group coaching program right now that Mercedes just mentioned, and she just is so passionate that she is overtraining. And she's been training on her own for a while. And so actually, one of the things that we are trying to help her with is just shifting her training in a more sustainable way, because she will see so many more gains by doing that. So one of the things is reducing your training. This could also be because life is busy or other things are busy. So instead of like quitting altogether, you could reduce your training and make adjustments using the philosophy edit, don't cancel. And sometimes what can happen too, it certainly happens to me, especially when life gets busy or, I'm just not feeling stoked on training, is that sometimes when we train, certain things about our training will seem a lot harder than other things. So for example, recently for myself, I've discovered that I was really dreading my strength sessions. I was really not doing them, and I started moving them to other days, which I do not do. I am an overly ambitious person. I hardly ever move my training sessions unless I have to for scheduling reasons, but I don't move something. I'm already at the gym. When I start moving my sessions around, that's a bad sign. So I had a conversation with myself and I was like, Katja, why do you not want to do these strength training sessions, which you love strength training? And I really sort of like just literally listened to myself, and I was like, I'm really dreading deadlifts. And I just came back, to deadlifting after having a back injury. And part of that is I feel nervous about injuring myself. And part of that is also, if I'm honest with myself, I'm just such a pusher. I do like to push my limits. That is also true for squatting. So there's now two ways that I have worked around this. And I am sharing this because this has really made me not want to train. Just these two exercises made me not want to train my whole session. So here's two ways, or actually three ways of how I go about this. So let's say when I have a day where I'm supposed to deadlift, my back feels sore and I feel really nervous about it. I just do everything else and I don't deadlift. I still get a great session in. Oh my goodness, that was a game changer for me. I'm like, Katja, you know what? You're clearly very anxious about deadlifting right now. Either you deadlift another day, or you know what, guess what, you didn't deadlift for almost 2 years and you still got really strong. I think you will survive. Just don't deadlift. So I didn't, and it felt great. The second thing that I started doing with my squats is I just don't push the weight as much. I just add 10 pounds less. Just removing 10 pounds from my squatting, I'm like, now it feels like a very doable exercise versus always trying to push the weight. I'm like, this is great. I can lift this feeling fine, and I'm now not dreading my session. Okay, screw those 10 extra pounds. I'll get back to them when my mind is ready to push myself again. Because we can mentally burn out always pushing ourselves. When we train, we push the weights, we push the time, we push the numbers, we just push, push, push. At some point, our brain is just gonna be like, too tired. I need a break from pushing. those numbers. And so that felt really relieving to me. And the last thing that I sometimes do is I do a sandwich of things. So I will rearrange my schedule, or I will rearrange my training session in a way that I do a more fun exercise first that I enjoy, that makes me feel strong and good. Then I do the exercise that I don't want to do, and then I do another fun exercise. So I do the sandwich approach. Because often, obviously, especially with deadlifts, we often program them at the beginning of a session, but sometimes that makes it harder for me to get the session started. So then sometimes I change it around a little bit. And then usually I add a little less weight if I'm already a little bit tired. Anyway, those are my ways of kind of changing this feeling of anxiety or burnout around specific training sessions versus around training altogether. Yeah.
Yeah,
Anything
I
else you
just
want
recently
to?
did that. Yeah, I had to do like I guess a volume session after doing not limit attempts because I'm not at limit right now. But it was it was supposed to be 40 minutes of volume, and I'm like, there's just no way. And instead of saying, no, I just can't do the session, I decided to put a 20-minute timer on instead of 40 minutes. And I said, let's just see how many you can do in 20 minutes. And I felt great. I was like, oh, I'm so glad I did that and didn't just stop the session at the end of my harder climbing. Um, so yeah, definitely like these are small things that you can do. Like Katja just like named some really actually very good strategies to just continue your training without stopping. Edit, don't cancel. Um, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Mercedes. And the last thing that I want to say, if all falls through and you can't do any of the things that I just suggested, remember that climbing is supposed to be fun. That's ultimately why most of us are here. Most athletes who we work with, that's not their job. And so it's supposed to be fun. And sometimes just changing it up, bringing in variety and just bringing that fun back can be huge. And I say this, and really, what do I mean with this? Let's say if you're really at the point where you're like, I just cannot train, like this is all too much, you take a week off training or two, and you just climb. Most people are on training phases that that's going to be okay. For some training phases, it's not as ideal, but people who are on very specific blocks of training, they tend to know there's going to be an end. They work towards something very specific. So they probably are not going to feel the burnout that we're talking about. But if you're on just a more general training plan, it's okay to take a week or two off. Sometimes I even program that for my athletes in between training plans because it is so nice to just have a week or two where you just show up to the gym and you just climb whatever you want to do. And you kind of just reconnect with the joy of climbing. There's no pressure in getting things done. You can hang out with friends, and it's just often it just feels good. And sometimes when I find myself doing that, sometimes I only need a day or two of that. Like I give myself a week or two of just climbing for fun. But sometimes it's just a day that I need where I'm like, oh, I just needed a day where I just go to the gym and it feels like Candyland. I can just climb whatever I want to. Because I think training for me sometimes just feels so restrictive. I'm like, I can only do these things that my training plus says I can't do. And so just like bringing some fun in, just climbing for fun can just be so, so powerful and really bringing back that joy. I also want to share a quote. Actually, just had a discussion with one of her community members about this. She also feels burned out of training regularly. So again, I want to emphasize, if this is you, this is totally normal. And she says what helps her is to remind herself that climbing progression happens in seasons. We don't need to get better at everything at the same time. And so sometimes what she does, again, is she switches us up, she brings variety in. Sometimes we have a season where now we're going to do strength training. And you know what? After that, you can work on other aspects. You can work on technique, you can work on climbing outdoors, you can work on endurance. There's different aspects that you can work on. Again, I want to emphasize, you can always put a performance season in. One of my athletes, she mainly just trains inside, which normally we don't have performance seasons when we climb inside. Normally we associate performance seasons with climbing outside. And then naturally those people have a break in what we call quote unquote training. Most of us still train while we're in performance season, but it looks very different and it doesn't feel like training. But I'm now actually scheduling performance seasons for my athletes inside too. One for mental burnout, also to change, some physical ways of training. So it's still part of the training to do the performance phase. Because now we can practice projecting and climbing harder things. But I think it's really important for people to remember that we train to climb, and sometimes to just climb is going to be just fine. I actually used the same method with another athlete. I want to just mention this real quick, Mercedes. She was also feeling not good about training. She's feeling she's not getting stronger. And I could immediately tell this was more of a mental burnout / she was getting nervous about her upcoming trip. And this was maybe 10 days or a week before her trip. Let's maybe say 2 weeks before her trip. We had what I call an emergency call, where I had a coaching call with her just because she wasn't feeling well. And at that point, I told her to stop all training and just climb 2 weeks before her trip. And so she did that, and all of a sudden she realized how strong she had gotten from training. So she just felt burned out, but because she couldn't see all the gains she had made, like her mindset switched so quickly. And that was really great because she went into that trip feeling really good, whereas just 2 weeks before she felt really horrible about it. And then she ended up climbing her first V10, and it was really amazing.
Yeah.
So
And I
switching
want
it
to say
up.
that, yeah, like that athlete actually came to us wanting to climb V8 and maybe V8 more consistently. And then all of the training that she has been doing, and then you had that call with her. I think that even just like that mental switch, like helping your clients that way. Uh yeah, and then she went and did double digit. It was like amazing.
Yeah, she's
Yeah.
amazing. Very
Yeah.
talented climber.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I love what we do, because we
That's
get to
great.
work with so many, so many wonderful people. I still am just
Yeah.
so thankful.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
anyway,
Amazing.
if you want to work with us, feel free
Yeah.
to check out any of our
That's right.
resources. But Mercedes does have a really amazing program coming up. It's called Pulling Strong. So if you're someone who is actually new to training, which you might have not listened to this, or if you've been
Yeah.
training for a while, but you still feel like specifically you want to increase your pulling strength, so specifically pull-ups, check out
Yeah.
that program. That's a really easy way to get started working with us too,
Yeah.
and see what it's like and get stronger while you're at it.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you. We'll see y'all in the next episode.
Sounds good. Bye, everybody.
Bye.